Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're logging on and listening from and watching in the world. And welcome to our third and final keynote session in this Business and Places Day of Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week 2023, sponsored by Two Blues Solar. Next up, we're exploring the very topical issue of natural capital and nature-based solutions and the role that they can, and indeed must, play in our response to climate change. In the UK and indeed globally, there's been a growing interest, I know, in nature-positive infrastructure development to help drive change in the sector. And nature-based solutions have the potential to complement, or even in some cases, even replace traditional or grey infrastructure and help combat climate change and enable countries to meet their net zero targets. Faced with the dual threat of climate change and global biodiversity loss, infrastructure developers, designers and providers are under growing pressure to move from no net loss to a nature positive infrastructure development. We've got a great panel to help us discuss some of those issues and also explore the importance of nature-based solutions and the role that they can play in responding to climate change. We've got John Halsall from Amey, we've got Ed Beard from the National Infrastructure Commission, and we've also got Eleanor Harris from Galbraith. After they have all spoken, we will have an opportunity for Q&A. So if you've got any questions, then do post them in the chat and we'll do our level best to get to them in the time that we've got available. So first up, our first panelist is John Halsall, who is an environmental lead at Amey, and he's going to look at how we can effectively build in climate resilience, reduce embodied and operational carbon, and creation of legacy for communities through nature-based solutions. He'll also examine how infrastructure owners like National Highways and Network Rail can accelerate actions in addressing global mega trends. So, John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andy. So thanks for the introduction. So I look after the North and Scotland region of sustainability solutions as part of a business of 120 environmental sustainability professionals working in that response to. So Amey is a leading UK provider of full life cycle engineering, operations and decarbonisation solutions for transport infrastructure, public buildings and estates. We manage over 30,000 kilometres of highways for National Highways, Transport Scotland and Department of Infrastructure. We're the largest, most diverse, multidisciplined rail organisation who offer design and build and maintenance. And we offer a complex facilities organisation where we deal with essential facilities management, asset management and decarbonisation solutions for the education, defence, health and prisons estate, just to touch on a few. We've just this week launched our ESG strategy, and the three areas that we're looking at is supporting our clients, like we described. So it's accelerate the change to resilient and low carbon future, addressing decarbonisation and energy efficiency. Nature positive, there's a big push on that in terms of enhancing biodiversity and going for more greener areas to enhance the projects we're working on. And that resilience, that climate resilience, the climate is changing, and the race to net zero and decarbonisation and past 2080. And the other areas are enhancing well-being of people and the communities we impact, and achieving sustainable and responsible growth in partnerships, risk management approaches and ethic and compliance. So in terms of nature-based solutions is kind of the area I wanted to just pull into a bit more depth. Nature-based solutions refer to a suite of actions or policies that harness the power of nature to address some of our most pressing societal challenges, such as threats to water security and the risk of disasters and environmental change. And some of the ideas that I came up with in terms of solutions that we can help people and our clients, is to influence the process by working with clients early in the design process to really understand the challenge, collaborate with stakeholders, clients and regulators to understand their perspectives, get into the mindset of our clients, work with the designers and engineers and our supply chain to innovate throughout the whole project lifecycle to incorporate nature-based solutions. And when we're devising these, think about nature-based solutions and think about carbon reduction. Social value is a big area of Amey, and improving the biodiversity, and have that in mind. Always consider innovation and challenge. A couple of areas that nature-based solutions can address climate change in 3 areas. We can decrease greenhouse gas emissions through softer, greener engineering, which Andy mentioned. We can capture and store carbon dioxide in the atmosphere through sequestration, through the organic matter, and then enhance resilience of our ecosystems. Because obviously flooding is becoming more prevalent, sea level rises, droughts, heat waves, it's here and now. And we need to respond. And here are some of the examples of where we can include smart technology in our ideas in our design and infrastructure. And just a couple of examples, just to sort of elaborate of where we've done this. On the Sheffield Streets Ahead contract, we partnered with Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust on a living highways project, where we've improved the biodiversity along the network. Staffordshire, we've used our social impact days. We each get 2 days a year, and planting trees and creating that carbon sink. And then finding over in a rail contract, Northamptonshire, we work with Network Rail and local communities to really enhance the sort of importance of biodiversity and the community feel of that site. And it's a real asset, that project. And a couple of major projects that we've worked on is the A66 Northern Transpennine upgrade, and biodiversity net gain and landscape assessments were undertaken for that. And on the A590 Crossmoor Junction improvement project, we looked at flood resilience and landscaping, and including the biodiversity and wildflower and the drive for biodiversity net gain and responding to our client requirements. But as I say, it's really understanding what the client wants and on the global mega trend issues that were prevalent here and now, and we need to respond now. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, John, for that, and really good to hear all the stuff that you're doing with those clients. I'll probably come back to some of that in the Q&A. Our next speaker is Ed Beard, who's the Assistant Director at the National Infrastructure Commission, who do some absolutely fantastic work, holding the government to account on its infrastructure strategy and plans going forward, and also scoping out and mapping out a vision as well, I think it's fair to say, about where we should be headed as far as our national infrastructure is concerned. He's going to set out the Commission's view of priorities for climate change adaptation, including some highlights from its surface water flooding study published in 2022, and also hot off the press, the second National Infrastructure Assessment, which was published on the 18th of October this year. Ed, over to you.
Thanks, Andy, and I'll say good morning. I'm here in London, so it feels like morning's still here. Thanks for that. So as Andy said, we published our second National Infrastructure Assessment on the 18th of October, so this year, and that looked across all the economic infrastructure sectors that we're asked to look at by government. We're an arm's length body of government, and that's floods, water, waste, digital, energy and transport. And not surprisingly, looking across all of those pieces, some of the priorities really were around how you deliver net zero across the economy, especially what you need to do to energy production and heat in that space. But we also looked at all the other sectors as well, as we do every 5 years. This really is our big set piece. And there we saw the opportunity that you do need to consider, as we've just heard from John, the sort of impacts on natural capital of any new development that you undertake. And we, as part of this assessment, looked at natural capital impacts of our recommendations. That's quite hard to do because we're very strategic, so it's a very high level that we're looking at, and you need to be more scheme specific when you're actually looking at direct impacts. But nonetheless, we recognise there are mitigations you can do when we're calling for new infrastructure where it's needed, to make the impact minimal. But we also recognise that a lot of the infrastructure is there already, and a lot of what's being built is going to be serving people for a long time to come. So the way you manage and renew that infrastructure can also be done in ways that enhance the environment. And again, we just heard from John about some of the ways you can do that alongside transport networks, but also we thought there was a lot of space in flood and water management as well. The main focus of our sort of green measures was more around the water management and particularly flood risk management. And so we made recommendations to the government in terms of flood mitigation that they really should have a long-term plan to reduce that and take account of the impact of climate change. And so they should have a plan to develop the right infrastructure to reduce the risk of flooding of properties. And perhaps last time we recommended a national standard. This time we didn't, but we felt that the national standard was an appropriate place to start a conversation with communities about how you would mitigate the impact. We were very into recommending that as part of that you do consider nature-based solutions where possible. They're not always going to be feasible, but particularly with climate change in mind, nature-based solutions might be a way of enhancing the performance of existing infrastructure. But if you're working up in the catchment, that can be a bigger and more difficult challenge than just building a new barrier or wall. But we very much felt there's space to do that. And more specifically, as Andy also said, we looked at surface water. We were commissioned to do that by the government a couple of years ago now, and we published last year, and we're still waiting for the response, but we believe it might be coming out soon. And in that, again, we looked at specifically the surface water impact, and particularly in urban areas of sort of high rainfall and the way drainage systems try to manage that. Our main findings were that, not surprising, that climate change is going to have a big impact on that. You're going to have more intense rainfall and therefore more volume to cope with in a given period of time. But also, we know that new development and urban creep sort of more widely will also be an influence on that, because the more impermeable surfaces you have, the harder it is again for drainage to absorb that. So we made a number of recommendations around that. The key was we felt that if you spent about 4 billion over what you would be investing anyway in your infrastructure, your drainage infrastructure, you could reduce the risk of numbers of properties at high risk of surface water flooding by about 60% by 2055 if you spent 4 billion above your existing maintenance over that period. That figure totals around 12 billion over that time. A key part of that is keeping surface water out of sewers, because the faster you move water to a given area, the more likely to have pooling and flooding. So it's a real way of avoiding that. So our recommendations really were get on and implement Schedule 3, particularly the SUDs for new development, but also think about, as I say, the permeable surfaces and how you control that, or make sure that people use impermeable surfaces, and again, nature-based solutions where feasible in their developments and when they're doing new patios, extensions, or whatever else. You need to understand the problem, so you need to be able to model that and agree what the problem is between the different partners with responsibility. Our view was that it's mainly water companies and local authorities that have the main impact on drainage, and they should agree a plan together that has objectives that they will reach in a given time. We felt you should use a hierarchy, so prioritize optimizing your existing system, whatever that might be, but then you should prioritize above ground solutions before you work on below ground. And we also felt that where the money would be coming from local authorities and their capacities of flood risk management authorities, that money should be devolved early on to fund the program rather than them bidding in to sort of the schemes that the government runs in terms of flood risk management grants, because that you lose a lot of time and capital just bidding into those processes. It'd be better to identify your problem, say what your solution is, and get the funding for that. It would probably come 40% if you continue existing sort of investment ratios from the public sector, and 60% from water companies, because obviously their networks have a huge influence on drainage. And I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Ed. I know we'll return to some of those issues in the chat. I've certainly got a few questions that I want to put to you about what the NIC is doing in this area, and whether or not its advice and guidance is actually being acted upon. But that's just one for you to be thinking about while we listen to our next speaker, who is Eleanor Harris, who is the natural capital and carbon leader at Galbraith. And she's going to talk about the Facility for Investment Ready Nature in Scotland, FERNS initiative, which addresses one of the key natural capital questions: how do we fund it? How do we fund change? Eleanor's going to outline the range of approaches being taken, including in her own FERNS project. Eleanor, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning from very sunny Edinburgh. Thank you for having me. The FERNS project is a very exciting time in Scottish natural capital, because 27 projects have been launched all around Scotland, sharing £3.6 million of funding. We all put in our applications in June and did quite a lot of work in advance of that. They all started in October. And there's now a frantic gearing up because we have to have them all finished and delivered and the funding claimed by March. So over the next 6 months, there's going to be a huge amount of conversations, learning, capacity building on nature markets in the broadest sense. The FERNS funding is not, it's provided by Nature Scot and Heritage Lottery Fund. So you'll see there's a theme already emerging of nature restoration for community, public benefit, social benefit. It's not funding nature restoration on the ground. You can't get money for planting trees or re-wiggling rivers. It's getting projects investment ready, whatever that means. It's getting the people and the structures and the processes in place to access private sources of funding for doing the work on the ground and for creating financially sustainable projects. I'm involved in 3 so far. I'm hoping to get involved in a few more if I can. There's one I'm a partner on, the Northwest 2045 project, which is up in the very far northwest of Scotland. If you go in the sort of first half of the North Coast 500, it's that bit right up there. And we're looking at developing a community-led natural capital project development company. So rather than people coming in from the outside and saying, this is what we think you need in your landscape, and we're going to bring in some funders and we're going to make some profits and go away again, this is really rooting natural capital project development in the local community, so that they're designing projects that suit them and they are part of that nature economy, and they're sharing in the benefits of it. I'm also involved in a project with Dumfries and Galloway Council looking at marine restoration, all kinds of aspects, salt marsh, which is where we're involved, and my land agent team here at Galbraith are going to be surveying some coastal areas for salt marsh restoration potential. But they're also more widely looking at oysters and seagrass and other forms of marine coastal restoration. And I'm also just getting started on a project in Perthshire looking at riparian restoration. So kind of typical Scottish river system. We've got a town at the bottom that every time there's rain it floods, and you've got this somewhat treeless catchment with perhaps the odd old conifer plantation in it. And they're looking at bringing landowners together to reforest and restore and enhance those rivers for biodiversity and flood prevention and other ecosystem benefits. And my role is what are the structures? How do you turn this into business? As I say, 27 projects, loads of people involved, lots of different approaches, lots of new ideas being developed. I'll plug mine, which is my approach is, my light keeps going off. We've got a lot of discussion of credits and mechanisms, and I'm really steering away from the biodiversity credit or the carbon credit or the metric, the mechanism. I want to start with projects and partnerships, because I believe that you want a good thing to be going on the ground, and you want good people who trust one another getting involved, and then you bring in the metrics, the MRV, the mechanisms, the contracts, the agreements to deliver that, rather than the tail wagging the dog. So I'm focusing on those projects and partnerships and building up that capacity locally, and then starting to build relationships with potential corporate buyers. and because this is essentially about usually it's a corporate partnership, someone's going to fund it. And it has to be strategic. It has to be not just a photogenic conservation project with a kind of headline charity involved and you've got some nice photos. This has to really meet the needs both of the local place, tackling global environmental issues in a way that's suitable locally. And it has to also be meeting, and the two are very much overlapping, it has to be meeting the real needs of the corporate on their ESG pathway, whether that's meeting biodiversity net gain type compliance, whether it's attracting talent, whether it's meeting the ESG investment criteria, whether it's telling a carbon story. The way that project's going to be built is going to depend on both those sides of the equation, and it has to be strategic, has to fit in with science-based targets, TNFD, all the other things going on. So all very early stages, very keen to talk to anyone who is interested in learning more, very happy to answer questions. There's also going to be a second round, where they've just announced, so that we can apply for more funds projects in January. And there were some projects which made the expression of interest stage and then weren't able to be funded in the first round. So this is going to go on. There's going to be lots more of this. So as I say, Scotland, exciting place for natural capital markets just now, and do give me a shout, ask me questions, and join the conversations.
Thanks very much indeed, and I just put the link in the chat there about the next round of the Ferns expression of interest, open on the 1st of December 2023. So have a look at that if you're interested. But thanks, Eleanor, for now for your introduction. Right, some questions. The first question I wanted to ask was to John, actually. Obviously, Amey works with some key infrastructure clients, operators. How do you think owners like, for example, National Highways or Network Rail can accelerate actions in addressing some of the megatrends in this area and elsewhere?
Oh, good question. I think we all got our part to play in supporting the global megatrends. Every single bit is a big puzzle, and we're all supporting, working in the same direction. I think we need to just really be ambitious with our targets, supporting clients at the outset when they're coming up with ideas. As consultants, we're in quite a good position as we can educate and convince clients, and work with our engineers and our designers and regulators and bring everyone to the table so that we could drive the change and make it happen. I mean, it's here, it's now. These megatrends, the climate is changing. It's evident. You know, we've had storms, 3 or 4 storms come through this season, and we need to respond. So it's just working very, very closely and getting in early and pooling our ideas and thoughts and bringing all the different specialisms together. Is my perspective on that one.
Just flowing from that, John, do you find that clients are actually receptive to this? I know in the past it was the exception and not the rule, and obviously, hopefully, it's becoming more and more prevalent. But are you getting a good response when you're raising these issues with clients?
Yeah, I mean, just to draw a reference on, at the moment we're tendering for control period 7 in Network Rail contracts. So Network Rail is a client, as a major infrastructure sort of owner and operator. There has been a huge step change in terms of the tender queries, tender questions that you have to submit. So they want absolute clarity on what you're doing in terms of sustainability opportunities for covering biodiversity, nature-based solutions, decarbonisation, PAS 2080, circular economy, and the list goes on. So you need to be really, really stretching ourselves and questioning the way that we do things daily. So absolutely, our clients are responding. There's sometimes barriers in terms of funding. and we need to help access additional funding for any innovation that we come up with in terms of ideas. But generally clients are very, very receptive to the work that the arena I work in major infrastructure providers.
Okay, thanks for that. I just want to ask Ed a question about the government's storm overflows discharge reduction plan, which basically sets stringent new targets that will require water companies to deliver the largest infrastructure programme in water company history. Well, at least that's what the government say. Ed, what are the opportunities and risks around that plan?
Thanks, Andy. Yep, I think it is a great opportunity because it's going to drive a lot of investment. You might argue about whether it's the priority right at the moment, as with what sort of environmental gain you will get in terms of the influence of those discharges on the environment. But clearly, it's an ambition. It's a public desire that something's done, so it's going to drive a lot of investment. And I think the good thing there is that water companies' aim would be to reduce the amount of water getting into their sewers in the first place, because for them, the less storm water they have to manage, the better for their infrastructure. But I think that's great, because you could see a rollout of lots of natural capital and lots of extra green solutions. But I think the challenge comes with the fact that it's a very ambitious program that the government wants delivered quickly. And that sort of pushing we see from the drainage and wastewater management plans and the water company business plans is pushing them in a direction of sort of certainty of outcome and speed of development, which is pushing them down a sort of concrete solution approach. So it's easier because the performance of a big storage tank, how long it will take to build it, you'll probably be able to get it into a given place. So there's lots of certainty around that, and it will do the job you've asked of it. But it would be much better if you looked up your catchment, drainage catchment, and found ways of stopping the water getting in there in the first place. But that's a much more time-consuming process and less certainty of outcome. And I think the danger is we get pushed to speed of finding solutions against the better long-term solutions, which would deliver so much more than just a reduction in spills at the end of pipe. It would enhance the environment and look at a much better way of managing surface water.
Just on that, Ed, and I appreciate that obviously corporate organisations obviously have to comply with the regulations and everything else. How do we encourage, though, that longer term outlook that you've just alluded to?
Well, I think it's through innovation. So it was very good to see someone like Severn Trent have already got ahead of the game in Mansfield in looking at how the surface water is managed there, with a view, admittedly, to getting their CSOs in order. But it's meant they've really reached out into the community, working with the local authority and looking really at surface measures first, and have, because they've got a plan and they've got money, they've identified opportunities that might otherwise have passed. So where for social reasons you're looking to enhance an environment, have a nice park or whatever, you might end up with a nice park but not have thought about the drainage potential of that. And because they're there with money, they're able to sort of step in and support that. So I think there's a real innovation and demonstrating that it can work side of this, but also it is that recognizing, I think, from the regulatory perspective, that things will take time, and it's better to get the most optimum, best value solution than necessarily pushing just for speed.
Thanks, Ed. Eleanor, when you spoke, you talked about the fact that there was a number of different stakeholders involved in all of this, as there always is with infrastructure and the environment, and you've obviously got to balance the different areas, organisations' own corporate ESG goals, and obviously the whole aspect of the public as well, and also what's needed for the environment. How difficult is it in practice in balancing what might be on the surface competing or at least not aligned interests?
It is proving a challenge. So you think, let's roll out peatland restoration. That's a major Scottish Government priority. You get onto the actual site and you find there's 40 crofters with a few hectares each who actually can't make the legal commitments that are required under the peatland code. And we've been involved in a few projects which get to that point and then they get stuck. There's a lot of wicked problems in natural capital restoration, and it is very much around people. My optimistic sense is a lot of these challenges, and there's perceived obstacles, there's perceived threats amongst communities from natural capital, perceived threats from by businesses trying to achieve natural capital from communities. I think this really shouldn't be the case. This is a kind of something that's somehow got created by social factors that really. Flood prevention should jolly well be a good thing for everybody, and it's just a case of making sure that that trade-offs are understood and managed, that we're again not being driven by mechanisms, but looking at what is the best thing for each piece of land. Is it habitat restoration? Is it regenerative farming or forestry? Is it amenity for the local community? Is it something that's going to meet global goals, and how many of these can we layer together? And so there's perhaps something that I'm really keen on is to really start with the people, and let then I think the outcomes will follow. That's community is very much a theme in Fern, so there's a lot of discussion about how this is done well from the perspective of communities. Everyone's learning as well. That's every day I learn more about nature-based solutions, and everyone I talk to. A year or two ago, I was having to explain carbon codes to all sorts of people, and now everyone understands carbon management, carbon codes, offsetting. The problems is offsetting, how we do it better, and everyone's now at the point of, right, I've grasped this, now I'm thinking how to do this better. So the level of capacity has really shot up, which makes things a great deal easier.
Thanks, Eleanor. Just kind of from looking at this sort of on a bigger picture basis, it seems to me that this is an area where the infrastructure sector, in providing nature-based solutions, can actually enhance its reputation, really, because often the sector is seen as, dare I say, a destroyer of the natural environment, when actually what we're seeing here and the issues that we're discussing here is a real way that the infrastructure sector is enhancing the natural environment. Are we getting that message across as an industry, and should we be doing more? And whose responsibility is that? And I'll pose that first to John.
Do we need to do more? I mean, the clients that we work with in terms of Network Rail and Natural England, National Highway, sorry, they have clear strategies and clear approaches in terms of where they are doing, improving nature-based solutions and biodiversity and aligning to ESG strategy that we've got. So we've twinned with that, we've tied into that and responding to that challenge. I think we need to do, as an industry, do more selling of what we are doing on the ground in terms of infrastructure. There's a heck of a lot of good stuff that's happening. I still think we need to do more, but I think we need to elevate that and communicate that outwards in terms of this nature-based solutions. And I suppose it's kind of getting the community out there to understand what nature-based solutions is about. Everyone's on to decarbonisation and the race to net zero, but nature-based solutions are part of that puzzle. And I think we just need to elevate that in terms of making people more aware across to infrastructure is doing stuff. We need to do more, but we are doing a lot.
Eleanor, do you think we're getting that message across? I mean, you're obviously working with communities. You mentioned it earlier. Is that something that we could be doing more on? We should be doing more on?
It's been interesting starting to work with the farming industry over the last 2 years. And see, previously I worked with forestry, who are very much part of the world of infrastructure and the world of land, and they had a very joined up view. Farming, it's interesting that natural capital and carbon has come to them really very much via government, saying here's an opportunity to start to replace subsidies with carbon offsets. And so for a very long time, the only aspect of natural capital that farming had really heard of was carbon offsets. There was a kind of discourse going on between the farming and rural local authorities all around nature-based solutions, offsetting, doing something out with supply chains. And I did a piece of work for Argyll and Bute Council, where I talked to as many stakeholders as I could in the area and said, is there, the brief was, is there potential for more carbon offsetting? And most people said, we don't actually want carbon offsetting. What we want to do is sort the infrastructure out, because we could do more forestry if we had better haulage routes. We could improve our industry if we had better renewable energy. We could produce more renewable energy if we could get it out of the region. We could employ more people and expand jobs if we had better housing. So infrastructure is very much seen as the missing bit, but it's maybe not, it's being overlooked. And I think this is starting to change, but it has been overlooked in favour of this kind of glamorous new, the carbon credit idea. So it would be great to see infrastructure, telling its story as part of that joined up natural capital supply chain solution.
Thanks, Eleanor. Ed, just in answering that, it also seems to me, and Mark's got a question in the chat where he talks about the need for systems level change in the approach we take to the development and operation of infrastructure at all stages. Is there something in there about adopting that kind of really wholesale change approach to the way in which we look at infrastructure in order to ensure that all these different aspects, including the social value that was mentioned earlier on as well, that we get that out there and people see it?
I think there is, and as part of sort of our work in the past, we came up with design principles for infrastructure, and there was a heavy emphasis on that, on the point which I think John's already mentioned, which is that when you're thinking about these issues, it has to start right at the beginning of the process. So before you've got whatever it is you're going to actually implement, you've already thought about the environmental impacts and the way you're managing that. And so we've recommended government have design champions on all big sort of infrastructure pieces. So that's out there, and clearly a key part of that is the climate sort of and nature issues. Also, as we did a study which we published earlier this year on planning around sort of major infrastructure, and again, the recommendations we made there were looking at the sort of spatial development. So you are actually trying to bring, when you're developing new infrastructure, all the different types of infrastructure that might be landing in one place, and thinking about the impacts again across the piece rather than individually as each scheme is developed. You actually take a more coherent and strategic view. And again, we're waiting to hear how the government might receive that, but it was clearly you could do environment better than you are at the moment. So I think there is a lot of drivers from government that can create that, and the requirement for net gain itself is a good thing. But I think there's a lot more the sectors can do to promote what they already are doing in terms of the benefits. And I think we are seeing it increasingly is part of everyone's thinking. It's just making sure people recognise that. And as we say, you do need new infrastructure. And from as I said, we've got a lot to say about energy. You need a whole enhancement of the energy infrastructure and energy distribution and networks. And the way you do that will have an important impact and can have a real opportunity to deliver for the environment and wider issues.
And just finally, the same question to everyone, very, very briefly. Do you think that from a situation where, as I said or hinted at earlier, that it was the exception rather than the rule, this will become the norm, the way in which we approach infrastructure going forward? We will be looking at nature-based solutions as a matter of course in everything that we do from an infrastructure sector perspective. And I'll start off with that with Eleanor, then John, and then Ed. Eleanor first.
I think so. Galbraith also have commercial development and renewable energy departments, and there it's interesting. When I started at Galbraith a couple of years ago, I was seen as very much in the rural department, and now those departments are starting to increasingly come and talk to me because they're facing these questions and challenges in all their projects. I think we've quite only recently had the Kunming-Montreal Agreement, which does for biodiversity what the Paris Agreement does for carbon, and that's going to take a long time to kind of filter down into through governments, policies, international businesses, down to what we're doing on the ground. But I think that's it's going to happen a lot faster than carbon. And for me, that's a really useful way there. The overarching framework of we need to manage 70% of the world for regenerative production. So producing, but not in the way we're doing it now, and 30% of the world for nature conservation, better than we're doing now. We haven't quite got to the place of joining those up. People are thinking about biodiversity in their own interest bits, whether that's conservation or production. So I think there's a whole interesting route to see how that plays out. So I think yes, it's only going to and the climate adaptation. That's interesting how that's really come into the forefront. You have to think about the 100-year storm happening every year or every few years, and that's really focusing everybody's minds in terms of infrastructure.
Thanks, Eleanor. John, do you agree with that? Do you think that that's the direction we're heading in?
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen that specifically in rail. When you look at the network rail standards, the change that's happened over the last few years, we're coming up for a new standard update, and I wouldn't be surprised if nature-based solutions is written in there. I mean, we've already got biodiversity net gain in there past 2018 in terms of decarbonisation, carbon in new infrastructure, and using the rail carbon tool and looking at embodied carbon. So, I mean, this transcends other highways industry as well. So similar tools, but yeah, absolutely, it's going to be it's continually moving and continually improving.
Do you get
I still think we need to accelerate that.
Thanks, John. Ed, do you get a sense that is the music of the future?
I do, and I'd probably add to what's been said that it's also from an investment perspective that increasingly it's an outcome they want to see as well, where they're investing their money. There's a lot of infrastructure going to be developed across the world in the near future, and where the funds that will develop or pay for a lot of that come from, they are looking for those sort of outcomes as well. So I think not only are the developers themselves doing it, but the sector that funds that as well is looking in that direction. So it does seem very positive.
Great. What a great way to finish as well, that actually, as well as doing the right thing, there's money in this as well. And I think that's important point to make as well. Once again, we've run out of time. Thank you very, very much indeed to all of our panelists, to John Halsall. I basically renamed him as a trumpeter there. Well, there you go. John Halsall from Amey, Ed Beard from the National Infrastructure Commission, and Eleanor Harris from Galbraith. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to everybody who's taken part in all of our sessions today as part of Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week. Thanks also to everybody who has attended, who's asked questions and kept our panelists on their toes. I hope you've enjoyed all of our sessions and learned a thing or two along the way. I know I certainly have. So thanks very much for listening and watching. A reminder that all of our sessions, every single one of them, will be available for download on demand by the end of the week on the website, which is greeninfrastructureweek.com. Thanks again to everybody. Thanks for all of your input, and we'll see you somewhere soon. Thank you very much indeed.